right. I'm back again with more stuff to say that probably will make someone mad. But you know what? As I say at the beginning of every one of these things, my point is to not purposely go after anyone and or group or whatever. If you get offended, okay. That's your right to do so. But information given is based on observations and feedback of customers. For the most part, there's some opinion stuff in here. Obviously, you can't avoid it, but that's the way it goes. So if you don't like it, I'm going to say don't listen to it. Or listen to it and complain about it. But if you are a keyboard crusader, I don't care what you have to say because you have no valid points. You just irrationally lash out at people, and that's all you can do. So keyboard crusade away, but don't talk to me. On the contrary, if you would like to have a discussion about anything in the future, said in any of the past shows or anything, feel free to contact. And we will be more than happy to have you in for a discussion. So, today, as promised, I don't know if I promised it or not, but as promised,
Lies! It's all lies!
I have guests to confirm the garbage that comes out my mouth.
You should be ashamed.
I don't know about all that.
So, again, I'm Mick, the angry businessman of today's show. I have the professor. If you've listened to any of our previous podcasts, you will recognize his input from other shows. And then one of my, I'm going to call you volunteers, that comes in from time to time to help out, that overhears some conversations, Mr. Mark.
How we doing?
So, okay, I know I promised to get to this a couple of times and then just never did, but everybody's complaining about the price of everything. Flat out, across the board, right? We just got the new inflation numbers the other day, 9.1%. Somebody is insane somewhere and needs to do something. But prior to this inflation issue in the current dynamic, we've been complaining about prices related to the comic book industry, and specifically how many books that you could purchase per given hour of minimum wage and the price of a book, right? That's gone crazy.
Beyond crazy.
So, Professor, when you were a wee lad buying books, what was the average price of a book?
I can remember all the way back when they were 25 centers, but when I was actually buying them, they were about 35 cents. So, 35 cent an issue is what I'm comfortable saying was when I was a kid.
So 35 cents, and if you were working and someone paid you for an hour, what was your hourly rate at that time?
I want to say it around the time, of course I wasn't working at that time, but back in that time frame, I'm wanting to say without the numbers in front of me, it was something like $2.75 was the hourly rate for minimum wage, which if you're a kid of today, that's going to blow your mind. But yeah, at one time it was even lower than that.
Well, when I got my first job in high school, what was it, a gas station, not too far from the house, about halfway from where I grew up to where I live now. And minimum wage at that point it wasn't even $5. I mean, it was
maybe $3.15.
Yeah, it was
like that.
three something, $3.75, $3.15, $3.30, something like that, $3.35 maybe. So, and gasoline was around $1. And I want to say gasoline was when I first started driving. When it went to 115-ish. It stayed in that 115 range for years.
Well, this will blow your mind. I had a 1977 Buick that I drove around in high school, and I ended up selling it while I was in high school because of the Gulf War, because the Gulf War raised the gas prices. And I can remember when the gas prices hit $1.30, I was like, I can't afford to drive this thing. And so I got rid of my old car and ended up getting a more gas-friendly car. And that was at $1.30. So
yeah, so if you're talking, 35 cents, and the minimum wage is, $2 something, $2.15, $2.50, whatever. I mean, 35 cents. So for every dollar, you're getting what? $2 is 70 cents. Right? Another 30 cents would be $1. So you're getting, basically, for minimum wage, you're getting like $6.
yeah, at least $6.
Today, in comparison, the average comic book price starts at $4
It has been climbing.
and continues to go up. So at $4 a book, and the current minimum wage, not what people are wanting minimum wage to be, but the current minimum wage, I believe,
$8.75.
$8.75. So if you're lucky, you can buy 2 books. 2 and 6 is a lot of difference. I mean, when it's, so what I'm going to call the height of the comic book craze is going to be your 90s gluttony, right? So like 92 when the Death of Superman hit. What was that book? $1.25?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was right around $1, yeah.
So, and a lot of them were around 75 cents at that point. That was one of the first books to really hit like $1 to $1.25 range. I remember books being $1.25 for a really long time. And then, Marvel give us this spiel at one point about we're holding the line at $2.99. That lasted like a month, and then it went up. And now most Marvel books are $5 a piece. So you can't even get 2 Marvel books right now for one minimum wage.
I thought the $2.99 one was DC.
That might have been DC, but Marvel did it too. Now the only book that's still $2.99 is Spawn. Still $2.99. McFarlane still puts them out at $2.99.
He sells some wicked toys, so you don't have to worry about it.
Well, that's probably true too. But so my argument is to get these prices knocked down on some of these things. Why don't we go back to the old paper?
Well, we've talked about this extensively in the shop. My personal feeling is we've created an unsustainable situation because all these new books, they look nice as far as the paper and all that kind of stuff, but they don't degrade. I mean, these books will go through a thermonuclear war and be still an 8, a 9. They got to be able to degrade in order for them to be collectible, because when you have these massive print runs, and now compared to the old days, they aren't massive print runs, but when you have tons and tons of books that people are specifically buying just to collect, and they never degrade, then they stay in the market forever and ever and ever at really high grades, and they never renew them. So that's why all the older books now, like if you've been going to cons since the COVID stuff's been over, everybody got that sweet money in their pocket. They went and bought all these books from their childhood, essentially, and they've run the price of those old books up because there are a very limited supply of them, and it gets harder and harder. I mean, shops are having a harder time finding them. You got guys like what's his name there from Mile High Comics. He's going all the way to Virginia from Colorado or wherever it is that they're located. He's driving all over the United States to acquire collections, and he's acquiring collections that before he would have totally passed on because there's just not enough supply to handle all that. And so that goes to what we were saying with the way the books are made. And on top of that, and I get into arguments with this with guys at conventions all the time with various publishers. They all say, "Oh, well, we want to have these high-end books, and we want to have them look just so fantastic and everything be so great because that's what the customer wants." Well, as a customer, I can tell you that's not what I want. What I want is I want a reasonably priced book with good content. And right now, they've cut content. The writing is absolutely terrible in most of the new books. The art, half the time, is mediocre. They don't even do background panels anymore. They just slap a guy on the page and fill it in with red, black, white, whatever color in the background. I guess you use your imagination to what the back cave looks like, and then we go from there. And so you have less writing. The art's not as good. It's on this paper that never degrades, and then they jack the price up to cover the paper and all the other stuff, and who knows what they're paying these other guys, and they jack those prices up to $4.99, $5.99, $9.99. It's an oversize. Well, you know what? I used to buy 100-page giant size back in the day for $1. Why is it now all of a sudden that we have an oversized book and it's 10 times that? That's crazy. So
there was even some publishers that would, because you would see it on the corner, even though it was a 100-page book, it would say still 35 cents.
Yes, exactly.
They would still sell it for the same price as you would find in a normal book.
In my hand, Giant Size Power Man, number 1, 1975, 68 big pages. It says right on the cover, 50 cents.
And back then, worth every penny.
That same size book today, $10.
Yeah, probably. Plus, you'd have the 200 variant covers and all that goes with it.
I think that right there is what is destroying a lot of the comic book industries, and it's fine to have somebody come in and draw up something cool, but the fact that you have a comic book store that can't afford to buy 25 and then 50 and then 100 and then 1,000 when they don't even have 1,000 customers that come in for that book, it's...
So here's the other scam part of this too, and this goes back to what I said, I think probably in the original episode of this thing. So how are we determining the success of a book and how the sales work, right? So it's not based on what me, the retailer, is selling. It's based on the distributor, right? So however many Penguin sales or however many Diamond gets or whatever.
Well, it sure as hell isn't based on the opinion of the customer. I can tell you that.
Well, you're right about that. But, so what happens? So, for instance, and we know this one, exactly how this worked. Berserker number 1. You remember this thing? 1 in 1,000 signed book by Keanu Reeves. If you order 1,000 copies of this book, you will get a signed copy by Keanu Reeves. It's an exclusive cover. Right? So everybody orders this stuff, right? And then what do you get to do? We made this order completely refundable. So this is how they're getting away with it. So I order 1,000 copies. I get the one variant that I want to try to sell for $6,000 to $8,000 or whatever. Because Keanu Reeves, woo! And then I get to destroy 999 copies and send back to them that I didn't sell and sell to the one guy that actually was interested in the stupid book. Now, a lot of times they don't make these fully refundable, but the ones that do, this is how they're getting around it. And I think this is part of the reason that things, like Dynamite offers so many covers and all these other guys offer all these incentive covers. It looks good for sales that they originally sold it. But are you guys looking at any idea how much you're getting back in a return?
Well, I think the other thing is, this is a symptom of the other problem we just mentioned, and that is that there's no collectability in the market anymore. So in order to make them, quote, worth something, we have to create that collectability, and so they try to do that with these various covers and stuff, and it just isn't going to work. They require too much for those covers, and since they're not going to degrade either, they have to keep it limited, or otherwise the collectability isn't there. And
so I don't know if you remember this either, but here not too long ago, Walmart started selling packs of books, right?
Yeah.
So like Walmart's got 5 or 6 books packed in for $10 or whatever. And we quickly found out where the 1 in 100 variants were going, that the sales weren't having is, oh, now the 1 in 100s and 1 in 500s are now packed in Walmart $10 bundles. Why didn't you just make them available to the retailer so the guys could get them in the first place if they wanted them as an alternate cover? If you want to charge an extra premium for that said guy's cover, don't make me order 250 copies of the same cover just to get one of these things. Mark it $20, and if somebody wants it, they'll pay $20 for it. This isn't hard. It feels like extortion.
And see, what it really comes down to, it's not even a matter of how good the cover is. Like, you might have, say, an Alex Ross cover that's just dynamite, and that's what everybody wants. So everybody gets that cover. Then you might have some other guy who they do a short print run on, and because they did a short print run on it, now all of a sudden, he is cover J or whatever, or G, and that's all of a sudden the most desirable cover everybody wants because it has collectability because they did a short print run on it, and it might look like crap, but it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters in the print run.
I call that the Greg Horn syndrome. Right? Like, he does one variant cover for Supergirl that's a smaller print run for a second print, and that book's $300, and the standard A cover is in the dollar bins.
Yep.
And it's all because was a smaller print run, and people like his artwork, and he was, But, I mean, this is the symptoms of the 90s resurfacing, right? I mean, like, we had shiny covers and gluttony, and then what happened? The bubble popped, and everybody filed bankruptcy, and then we kind of started over to an extent.
I mean, even Marvel went back and started doing the holographic covers again for a while. And I was like, really, guys?
And lenticulars?
You didn't learn the first time around?
And I think a lot of the times this actually degrades a lot of the comic book artists themselves. Like, for example, I really like Campbell's stuff. But man, has he put out some shit. I'm talking really bad stuff. Why? Because they want him to do covers of this. So he's like, well, I got to do 20 covers. Let me just slap something on real quick, and then here you go.
Well, this is your Jim Lee syndrome, too. Look at Jim Lee in the 90s, and then now that he's head of DC, what he turns out. Right. He does a 30-second Batman now.
Yeah.
How good of a job can you do for a 30-second Batman?
See, that's an old syndrome. I know you and I have had this conversation about Bendis and, what's his name? The DC guy.
Mr. Johns.
Yeah.
Mr. Hack.
Now, I actually like Jeff Johns, but...
early Jeff Johns was okay.
But, I mean, it's the same exact problem here. And so the problem was, Jeff Johns was very good at what he did and everything when he came into DC. And DC needed the talent. So what they did was like, oh, well, instead of you doing these 2 books, it was like, oh, we're going to put you on these 20 books. Mm-hmm. They did the same thing at Marvel with Bendis. Like, Bendis came in and he did, Ultimate Spider-Man and all that. And I was like, and those books were halfway decent. But then it was like, oh, you're the one guy we have that can do this. Now you do these 20 books. And as somebody who's actually written stuff, I can tell you there's no way those guys can sit down and do a good job on that much material. So what ends up happening? Well, they focus on the 2 popular books that they're doing, and then they churn out a bunch of crap that everybody just kind of, and they slap their name to it and say, well, this was written by Bendis, so you should want to buy it. And it's like, no, it's terrible. And we just see that over and over again. As soon as they get somebody halfway talented, then they work them to death. Instead of actually paying for somebody to actually write decent stories and actually pay them to do the art and cut back on all the, we don't need 3D covers. We don't need, acid-free, super awesome paper that won't degrade no matter what. We don't need, the staples that'll never rust. We don't need... That's the stuff that makes them collectible. And until they realize that...
Because once you get to the point where there's only 5 available, then guess what? It's going to be worth money because there's only 5 available.
Yeah, Action Comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is part of the reason where some people are waking up and seeing now that the original page market is taking such a dramatic jump for all of their collectability, which is, I would love to be able to own original pages to books because there's literally one. You don't get one. And some books don't even have original pages anymore because everybody does everything digital. So the stuff that you do have, being completely uniquely that one item, now commands the price that you think that these things should have. I would like to see more of this market available to people in some fashion, because right now it's almost like a comic book underground to try to get it. If you don't go to a show and somebody doesn't have it in a portfolio, how do you get a hold of somebody? Who do you contact? I want to buy, the final page to Superman 75. Well, I don't know. It's like you got to know a guy who knows a guy. And I think those things are worth, the thousands of dollars that they're charging for them for the most part. But Harlequin #1 that had 52 covers, and because one of them was a part of a resketch and or color from, say, somebody that died like Michael Turner, does that really make it worth anything anymore?
Or what was it that we were talking about the other day? Miles Morales.
Oh my!
How it's a $3,000 book, but for whatever reason, a book from the 70s can't even uphold the same value.
I can't understand
what makes him having 10,000 issues out there worth more than a book that only has 20.
Well, this is kind of Spawn #1 syndrome too, right? Like, why but here's the thing. So the Spawn book, and I would say, is widely more popular and widely more owned by general comic fans than a Miles Morales first appearance from that Ultimate Fallout 4, right? That book is never going to degrade. It's made on all the new nice, super awesome paper that's going to stick around forever. And how many copies of that book did they make?
Right.
I mean, people, before, they decided to put Miles, it got really popular, and, people were buying these things for, $4 or $5 a piece because Marvel sent extra copies to shops and stuff at the time. I mean, we weren't in business at the time, but it was a thing. And, there's no reason that book commands a $3,000 value. He didn't even have a movie.
Right.
Yeah, cartoon movie.
Yeah, well, okay, cartoon movie, whatever. So, the other thing that I think, and I've harped on this 2 to 3 episodes so far.
Well, you only think about 2 things. This is one of the 2.
If I do more than 2 things at once, I fall down. So, content of the book, comparatively to when you were buying books at 35 cents, I feel that the stories were significantly more robust.
Without a doubt.
The art was better. There were a lot more words in the books. I kind of feel like being younger and reading comics also gave me a wider vocabulary than the normal individual, because they like to use a lot of emphasizing and fantastical words, and everything was,
fantastic.
yeah, cosmic related. Stan was always really good about
verbalizing a lot of different alternate words for something.
Yeah, adding all kinds of accents to every character out there. Why? And we'll just hit each of you on this. Why or what makes the content from then so much better than the content that I've got in a book that came out this week. Mark?
Well, being one of the younger readers, I can tell you that I was one of the ones that grew up in the 90s when comic books was doing all the flashy nonsense, right? And I can tell you the biggest difference, at least for me, because when you're a child and you want to read something, what's the main reason why you do? To escape reality, correct? You want to dive in to whatever you're reading and get away from whatever it is that you're stressed about in your real life world, whether you're a child or you're an adult, whatever, right? And if I pick up, let's say, a book from the 70s or 80s, right? What am I going to see? I'm going to see Batman kick the living crap out of somebody that robbed a bank, right? You know, you're going to see Superman fly in and save a woman from a fiery building, right? You're going to see things that are not typically known as realistic things, right? We can't fly, we can't do these things, right? And I feel now that, especially when it comes to the people that are writing these books, is they're wanting to take, or they forgot what the difference is between a social issue and pushing an agenda, especially a political agenda, right? Is it okay to have social issues in your book? Absolutely, right? Because there are things that you want to relate to. You know what I mean? Maybe one of your characters has a drug problem, right? Maybe one of your characters were bullied. You know, these are things that anybody of any age can relate to, right? And you need that in your comic books. You need to have your characters relatable. But it's a whole nother thing when you make the main emphasis on a topic that only 3% of your readers care about. And that's, I think, to me, is the biggest difference. Is we have gone from taking these characters that meant something to us, and we've turned them into pushing political agendas. And I'm not someone that's going to fare too far from the right or left. You know, I'm not going to say that the left is doing it or the right is doing it. I just don't care, period. I don't want to see it in my books, right? If I wanted to see what was going on in my real life, I would turn on the news, right?
Fair enough.
And I feel, like you guys were saying when it comes to how much books were back in the day versus what they are now, why would I want to come in here and spend $5 to $6 on a book and have 20 different runs of books that I have to buy because they all intertwine to each other? So I'm spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week just to read the news when I could do that for free. That is my biggest gripe and my biggest problem with new books. Is, you know, if you want to make a book that's about pushing a political agenda, then, you know, make sure that's what you come off that way. You know, say, hey, this book is about this, and sell to the people who want to read that. But don't change my books, the books that I would like to read, to push your agenda.
Professor?
Yeah. Well, my take on it is a little bit different. But of course, I'm a little bit older, and I go back to, I think part of the problem is, for whatever reason, the industry has decided that writers aren't artists.
Right.
And so they're not willing to put out the money to actually hire an artist, hire a writer. And so they do a lot of, artist-writer combos and that kind of stuff, and it's terrible. And the books are terrible. And, we just can't keep seeing this over and over again where, all these different agendas creep in and everything. And you're right. People say, well, the comic books aren't for kids anymore. They've always been for kids. They're for us adult kids, too. Like, we want to see Superman move an entire planet. We want
Right.
to see those kinds of things. And yeah, that's my take on it, anyways.
So I kind of feel like my Batman goes to space analogy is kind of where we're on the same page here, right? Like back in the good old days, all the comics used to do all those things that you can't do today, right? Like car pull up in front of the in front of the mansion or something around the Batcave and be like, "Come on, Batman, let's go to space." They don't do that anymore.
No.
You know, it's a bunch of there's a bunch of stuff that isn't done anymore that should be done that made the characters who they are that they just don't understand. And I think a lot of it is that nobody goes back and looks at what the character used to be and it's like, oh, I want him to be this, and now we get a new interpretation based on some, garbage idea that some guy had that doesn't reflect the character.
Well, one of the problems that you have is the guys that run things now, they have this kind of idea that the old stuff is campy or the old stuff is childish. What they don't realize is that's what we want. We want the escape. We want the kind of absurd stuff sometimes. I mean, they all can't be winners. I mean, not every comic's going to be the Watchmen. There is a place for those comics. Don't get me wrong. And, to go back to what Mark was saying when he was talking about politics, I always hear, politics has always been part of comics. Think back when, Captain America punched Hitler in the face. Well, yes, but that's more propaganda than politics. We weren't, dissecting what one or the other was saying. It was more of a stance against an opponent than it was politics. You want to have a good example of balancing out social issues and political issues where there's just really good writing and all that stuff. You got to go no further than Green Arrow, Green Lantern.
Yeah, if you look at the run that Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil pulled, those to me are the epitome of we have a social problem and here it is. And that whole run was about that, right? I mean, it started out because, like, Hal was supposed to have been seen as a racist who wasn't going to help a black guy, right? And Green Arrow's like, we're going to drag you across the country and make you learn something. Right. And that was the whole premise of that whole thing. But the Speedy 2-part drug issue, that was a big deal.
Well, and you also have Hal, who's basically, the more conservative-minded side of it, who's saying, well, this is why you can't do these things a certain way because it's not going to work. There's this order to society that that he knows because of being a quote space cop that Green Arrow didn't know. And I mean, it was just wonderfully balanced because you had the liberal side and those discussions with Green Arrow, and you had the conservative side and those discussions with Green Lantern, and neither side one up the other. Like, there were issues where Green Arrow was wrong. Yeah. And he has to admit to Hal that, you were right and I was wrong. And then there are issues like the one you were saying about, the black man where, he says, I saw you protect all these guys, but you never protected me. And Hal has to, face that. And so, I mean, it was just wonderfully done. And it's something that we sorely miss now in today's comics.
Well, there's an argument to be made that Denny O'Neil was one of the best comic book writers of all time, and that since his passing, you're not going to get that quality of work unless somebody does some legwork to go hire a crime writer or somebody that actually cares about the properties. So I think we can all agree that basically the price of the books and the content are just not where they used to be at all. And I think that is the major problem with the industry now and why people are shutting down pull boxes, why people are not buying new books nearly as much, and that they're just hunting for the old books. And every time we go to a show, the vast majority of things that I'm selling are old books. The vast majority of things that people are looking for when they walk in my door are not the brand new, Fortnite crossover with the codes for the kids to get the new skins, because that's kind of the new trend too, is to try to get people who don't normally buy comics to buy comics. So we do put out a gimmick book that's got a code that gives you a video game thing or whatever. This might be a topic for another show, but I really don't think there's that much crossover between video games and comics, and even video games and people who play D&D. I think those percentages are the crossover people are even smaller than what most people think that they are. So I'm sure we could probably complain about all that stuff in a completely different episode. But yeah, so I think, but what we boiled down here is that we're just looking at price and quality, and neither thing is anywhere near where it needs to be to get the industry back where it's moving. I think cutting the books price down to $2 a book would fix a lot of problems. Hear me out there, fellas. $2 a book. I think that's your sweet spot for brand new books, because it's cheap enough that people can try multiple titles, so you'll end up selling more books to people overall that way. And if you just look at the economics of it, as opposed to just keep driving the price up, I mean, you will find that, an elasticity medium on this. There's a point to where you're maximizing your money based on the price of these things, and you're not looking at it. Yes, the angry businessman is literally a business major. Who would have thought that I've taken business classes and learned things over the years? Surprise! But this is just like the oil industry tweeted to the White House the other day about sending the intern that wrote that whole thing about tell the gas companies to just lower their prices. I used to work at a gas station when I was in high school, and I can tell you right now that they make pennies per gallon of gas sold. It is not a lucrative business to have a gas station where the gas station makes its money or all the convenient stuff in the inside, like soda and candy bars and chips and cigarettes and beer and all that stuff. More of what a grocery store does. Plus, they supply gasoline, and that's how they get you in the door. That's what gas station prices on a bottle of soda or a 6-pack or whatever, or more than if you went to Kroger or Walmart. So keep that in mind too. But I think until we get price under control, you're going to continue to see some problems across the board. I think that we're going to price ourselves out at some point. Because what happens when the price goes up is people drop books that aren't necessarily great, that they're reading, that they're enjoying, and they're only getting what they consider to be the essentials for them. A comic book shopper is an impulse buyer. We like to see the visuals of covers, and if something looks neat, we generally want to pick it up and buy it. But the problem being is if everything is $10 a piece and you've only got $15 to spend, you're going to get the one thing and not try the one thing that might be cool this week, but you're going to get the one thing that you wanted in the first place. So I think that's honestly our biggest problem, aside from the content of the books. The content of the books right now are trash too, but this is, I think, the biggest thing. So I guess I'll stop right about there. I'd like to thank the guests in today, Mr. Mark and Professor Kreitz. Thanks for joining us. You guys are welcome back anytime to discuss any topic whatsoever. And again, if you are out there listening and would like to discuss any topic with us, please contact me and let me know, and we will bring you into the store or Skype you in or pre-record something or however you want to do it, and get you on here and talk about some stuff too, and have a good discussion, because that's what we do these days, because nobody else is doing it. Nobody else is talking about what's going on in the industry and how businesses are shaping up. So I'm going to tell you guys, we're at a point where it's starting to get scary out there. So, all right. Well, again, thanks for listening. Again, I'm Mick, the angry businessman at this point. And I'm going to leave you guys with the shop's commercial for the outro. So, enjoy.
Multiverse Comics, your super comic shop. We find what you need, we have what you want. From a brand new book to the back issue you need. From Marvel Independence, Image or DC. If there's a collection you just have to sell, Multiverse will help with that as well. For the hottest picks, come and see us. Multiverse Comics. Up and away!
Thanks, guys. And remember, as Billy Batson always said, do good, good will follow.